the Australian Embassy, Professor Vasiliki Bolomidis. Well, considering the need to develop an integrated approach to manage water basins, and based on the Australian knowledge about this topic, we've had many activities, such as webinars, training, and an online training program for different members of water basin councils throughout Brazil, a virtual exhibit with the participation of high school students, and also the book, which is going to be presented today. So everything here is for sharing knowledge and good practices with Brazilian and Australian members of different water resources committees, and also researchers and the community. The book will be available for download on December 18th on the IFSP website, TWRA, and all the institutional partners. We would like to thank all of the authorities, speakers, professors, researchers, students, university representatives, associations, and institutions for being here today with us. And every participant in the event is going to have around 5 minutes for their presentation. Now, I would like to ask all of the speakers who are here connected to open their cameras, to start their video for a few seconds for a picture. Please smile. Excellent. I think we have the picture. Thank you all so much. Now, to continue with our agenda today, I would like to turn it over to Professor Dr. Vasiliki Bolomitis to present some of the objectives and some of the themes on this project. She is a professor at IFSP, the Federal Institute for Education, Science and Technology in Sao Paulo in Caraguatatuba, ever since 2010, and now she is the coordinator of the Civil Engineering course. She was the coordinator of the project Educational Praxis in the Sustainable Management of Water Resources. Professor, you have the floor. Hello, everyone. I am Vasiliki from Caraguatatuba, the IFSP Caraguatatuba. And first of all, I would like to tell you a little bit about the project so that everyone understands what we decided to do and how it happened. And we finally have this publication of this book in a few days. Let me share my screen. Well, just to give you a broad idea, this started with a discussion of the Federal Institute with TWRA and also the Australian Embassy in Brazil through a project of the Office of the Dean, and that happened in 2020, and it was number 196. Well, we had 4 ideas. First of all, it was going to have a few webinars, 3 events, one of them in English as well, with the participation of Australian speakers. And each event was going to have around 2 to 3 hours duration, and they're all available on the TWRA channel on YouTube. So far, we've gotten up to 585 views for these videos. Well, they happened between August and December. We had 49 speakers from 37 higher education institutions, also research institutions, government representatives, and also companies from Brazil, 35, and Australia, 2. The second action here, or initiative, would be more of a remote training course. The main audience would be the members of different committees related to water resources, water basins, throughout Brazil. And the third action was going to be this virtual exhibit in which we had 65 people sharing some of their artworks, and this was connected to the perspective of the youth regarding this theme. In the book, we had the participation of 15 institutions, 12 from Brazil, 3 from Australia, and 26 authors. We also have a representative from an institution in England. Well, let me turn it over to Luisa now. And before I do that, I would like to Also, thank you all for being here and thank every supporter of this project. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Vasiliki. Now I would like to turn it over to Engineer Sergio Aidi Moraes from the National Agency for Water and Sanitation and the former superintendent of ANA, the agency, for some opening comments. Thank you. Thank you, Luisa. Good afternoon or good evening to everyone here in Brazil, and good morning to everyone who's connecting from Australia. Before I begin, I just wanted to apologize. I am connecting from a car, from my phone, but it's been a bit difficult with the different commitments, the different meetings. I also have to go to a personal important appointment right now, so this was the way I found to at least connect with all of you and say hello to everyone. And also thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Professor Vasiliki. It is a privilege for me to be able to be part of this pre-launch of a great initiative, a book that is going to be the result of this beautiful initiative, very important initiative. I just wanted to highlight a few things here. First of all, I would say that it is very important to have partnerships. In our work at the Water National Agency, the ANA, we've been trying to expand our network to execute different types of works, so of projects. So we believe that for this project, it is very important to have a great partnership, a great network of partners, really. So this is now a reality for us. I think we've been dealing with more and more information lately, and to do that, we have to be connected. Well, the second thing that I wanted to say has to do with this connection, Brazil-Australia. This is very important, especially when it comes to water resources. We're talking about two continental countries. We're talking about two southern hemisphere countries, and they have similar aspects when it comes to water resources. So of course we can learn from each other. It's a mutually beneficial connection, I would say. At ANA, we also have a memorandum of understanding with Australia because we want to continue to share these experiences and good practices. So I have to say this is a project that is very interesting, and the book is exactly about that, about sharing experiences and all the lessons learned. So both countries are going to learn a lot, I'm sure. And the third thing that I wanted to mention has to do with this focus on the participative management or the training of everyone involved in the management of water basins. We believe that this is one of the pillars, really, for a good management of water resources in Brazil. We have to think about this agenda and all the committees that are involved. I usually say that water basins, they have to be well managed. They're at the core of everything. And we have to think about the practical terms in which this is happening. We have to make sure that everything is well aligned with the project, with the possibilities. And for us to be successful in this path, I would say, it is very important, again, to share more and more knowledge and information. So this is, I'm certain, a very successful initiative, thinking about both countries and the online training of everyone and the committees and so on and so forth. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here. And I apologize again for the fact that I am connecting from my phone, but I really wanted to connect and say these words because I truly believe that it is a very important initiative. And I'm so happy to see that the book is being pre-launched now. I'm sure it is going to be very important for everyone dealing with water management in Brazil and Australia. Thank you. Thank you, Sergio. Let me turn it over to Mr. Andrew Edge now, in charge of businesses at the Australian Embassy in Brazil, for some comments. Thank you, Luisa. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today for the pre-launch of the book, Sustainable Management of Water Basins. I am here on behalf of some other colleagues. Before I continue, I would like to salute the Superintendent of Planning of Water Resources of ANA, Sergio Aire Moraes, also the President of TWRA, Jose Francisco Gonçalves Jr., the Director of IFSP Caraguatatuba, Mr. Calebe Monteiro Xavier, also the Director of Innovation and Technology Transfer of IFSP, Professor Alexandre, Director of Development of the Office of the Dean at IFSP, Professor Luis Felipe Borges Martins, the Coordinator of Water Resources of the Secretariat of Infrastructure and Environment from Sao Paulo, Mr. Paulo Rui Assis, the Director of the Department of Planning and Management of the Coordination of Water Resources, Yara Jacomine, professor from IFSP, and the editor of this publication, Professor Basiliki Bolomitis, and every person, every student, every researcher, every professor, everyone who has contributed for this book, especially Professor Ashanta from Queensland and Professor Nick Bond from who are both here connected today. I think he is on mute. Apologies. So this book is the result of a joint initiative. We have alumni from Australia, TWRA Brazil, and also the Federal Institute of Sao Paulo, IFSP. So together, they have this academic collaboration and research collaboration in a very important aspect, for both countries. We believe that it is fundamental for Australia and Brazil. As great producers of energy and agriculture producers, we need water to maintain these activities and to maintain our industries working, and to also be sustainable in terms of the future. Both countries are dealing with climate change right now and have some common challenges in terms of water and the management of drought or floods or some other extreme disasters that are happening right now. So in terms of collaboration to deal with these challenges, Australia and Brazil have just renewed a memorandum of understanding that is bilateral on cooperation and management of water resources. This is a very important scaffold or structure to continue to promote the technical cooperation between these countries. And this book, I am sure, is a very good example of such collaboration. I would like to congratulate the entire team who was involved in developing this publication. And this is something that the Embassy of Australia is happy to be part of. We are happy to support this initiative, and we want to continue to see what is going to happen in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Andrew. I would like to turn it over to Mr. Gonçalves Jr., founder and president of TWRA. Good evening, everyone, or good morning to my colleagues in Australia. It is a great pleasure to be here talking to you about what we have done so far in this Brazil-Australia initiative. I would like to actually mention two people and thank everyone in Australia. The first person that I wanted to mention, Stuart Bunn, from the director of Australian Breed Institute. He was the mentor and brought to Brazil of this initiative of TWRA. This is an initiative of an organization in Australia. I don't recall the specific name. Maybe if my colleagues from Australia want to remind me the name, Austrate or something like that. But anyway, he brought this to Brazil, and all these the past 6 years I've been able to help in this. So I wanted to mention this. And also Dr. Christina Elsner, who has received me at the embassy many times. I was always welcome at the embassy. I felt very well there. We had so many meetings throughout Brazil, in Paraná, Santa Catarina, in the capital as well, Brasilia. So she was always there and representing the embassy so well. So I wanted to really mention her name. This allowed us to have so many actions, so many initiatives. So I would say that everyone representing Australia was always so well qualified, so happy to help, that they allowed us to actually organize these initiatives. So we had Professor Vasiliki also as a very competent leader of this project, and this allowed us to discuss so many key topics. As was mentioned, this is important both for Brazil and Australia. It is very nice for us to exchange information and knowledge. Today, we have this MOU between the Alliance and our MIT and USQ. We were going to have one with Griffith University and also an intent letter, a letter of intention with Victoria University. And we're going to have some others. As Nikki Bond knows, we've had many discussions and we have amplified this with colleagues from Australia. So this was a great means for us to have a productive instrument for exchanging experiences, technical, scientific, human experiences, so that we could have good mechanisms in place and models that would allow us both in both countries to have this perspective, to be entrepreneurs, to have a better perspective. So this is the result of this main objective brought from Australia and something that we were able to make a reality. So just to wrap up, I just wanted to say something that I actually wrote in the preface of the book. It is important to remember that man, as an individual, as a citizen, is also responsible for water management. So we have to make sure that we're asking whoever is in charge to share their demands and solutions. It is evident that we need to have more knowledge and education from a population standpoint. So this book will bring many reflections from different areas of knowledge, and this will qualify this book as an interdisciplinary work relating to water resources issues. So we're trying to bring more information to everyone to change the reality of our society and stimulate an enhancement of the human sensations. I mean, respecting the common good. So this is a book that had many hands, many different contributions, And this is going to generously bring the possibility to every reader to understand more about the consequences of the environmental impacts on water basins. Also, we are going to show some possible solutions through sharing experiences and trying to have a good discussion. So this is for everyone, children and adults, because we no longer have time to continue just to think about the possibilities in the future. We have to act now. So I would like to, on behalf of TWRA, I would like to thank and congratulate all of the authors. Some of them are not part of the network, so I wanted to thank everyone for all the love they put into this work. We are very proud to see this project. Thank you all so much. And again, congratulations to all of the authors and congratulations on the initiatives of IFSP, the Australian Embassy in Brazil. Thank you all so much for this initiative and this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now we have Caleb Monteiro Xavier. He is the director of the Federal Institute of São Paulo of Caraguatatuba. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to all the colleagues that are in Brazil and Australia. It is a great pleasure to be here in this wonderful moment that crowns a project that is magnificent, that even though it has started in August, as we have seen, we have the presentation and we've had great results. Well, since I am the general director in Caraguatatuba, in the Federal Institute of São Paulo, I wanted to show you, well, all the other teachers and all the institutions that are involved in this project. Also, thank you TWRA for the Embassy of Australia and Brazil, and also the initiative in Brazil, the technology, and we created the development of the project. And for tonight, this is in the sense of what is the importance of the projects for extension for the reality, specifically in the campi of Caraguatatuba. And the federal institutes, both on the side of research and teaching, we want to make the knowledge democratic produced by these institutions of teaching. Nonetheless, it is important, fundamental for opening the doors of the campus of Caraguatatuba for the development of the community. And this is a commission based on the dialogue of the internal community, which is the teachers, the technology, the students, and those that work with technology, and external. Also, the community has a fundamental pillar, the conversation between these different agents and the entity. The event for tonight, the launching of the book, has at the root the practices in the sustainable management of water resources. We know that with that we want to support the production of theory and practical knowledge to better manage the waterways, water resources based on environmental, social aspects, political aspects, cultural, and economic. And the consequence of all this is to think about the current challenges to try and minimize the impact generated by the anthropic, by the actions that result from the actions of humans in water ecosystems. And we also have regional sustainability involved in this discussion. So you can imagine that this project, it was already explained by the teacher at the beginning of her presentation. We have many webinars. We have 500 people attending our webinars, and this is material that will be available at the internet. So this will be impacting for a long time, and a project that is very important and that will bear fruit for a long time. So the campus of Caraguatatuba, through this project, guarantees the guarantees the space for producing evidence and exchange of experiences, and also promotes the critical thinking of all the participants in the context of and all the students that we could manage in this project. That was great, and it was a unique moment for students. I thank you all for the opportunity to be part of this community. I congratulate everyone that has been involved in this project that will be culminating in December 18th in the publication of the book, and I wish that we have a wonderful night and that it's a great event. Thank you. Thank you, Caleb. Now to talk about the Australian collaboration for the development of the project, I would like to invite Professor De Ashanta Gutelekilek, Professor of Hydric Engineering of Queensland University of Technology. The floor is yours. You may open your microphone. You may speak.
Okay. Thank you. Let me share my presentation. Okay, so thank you once again. Firstly, I'd like to thank uh, the organizers for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this book, and also the opportunity to present today and to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about. So it's on urban water management in Australia. And just to provide some context, as it's commonly known, more than half the world's population is now currently living in urban areas. And according to the United Nations, that's going to increase by that's going to reach 66%. In other words, 2/3 of the world's population will be living in urban areas by 2050. And at in 2016 census, it was found that 86% of Australian population is living in urban areas and is predicted to increase to 91% by 2050. So that means the vast majority of the Australian population is living in urban areas. I think Brazil is a lot lower than that. And research shows us that as urban areas become more and more congested, urban water resources become very important resources, not necessarily for drinking, but it's an important community asset, it's used for recreation, and also it's an important ecological asset. In other words, there's a lot of wildlife that's living in urban areas close to the urban waterways. And when you think of the challenges imposed by climate change, is the situation in terms of urban areas, the situation is going to worsen. And because of that, we need very innovative strategies to manage our urban assets. So these are some images from Australia, some of the how the urban waterways are used for recreation. So as you see, cycling, canoeing, just walking. And also, this is some of the wildlife that we see in some of our urban areas. Now, I live about 16 kilometers from the city center, and this is our local creek. And so this is a koala that I just swam across the creek. So we get all of in fact, the research has shown that something like 80% of the Australian wildlife actually live in urban areas, in the urban bushland close to the creek. So preserving our urban water environment is very important also from an ecological sense. So in terms of urban water management, currently Australia does not have implement any large-scale structural measures. In other words, we have constructed some flood protection dams that was many years ago. Currently, we don't implement any structural measures. Rather, what we do is we adopt a risk management approach for managing urban floods. So in other words, stringent land use planning, which means you cannot build in certain areas if it's flood prone. And we have a very effective early warning system. And also it's about community education. So the objective is to reduce the cost of flood mitigation. And in that context, urban water management is very critical. So let me talk about some of the measures we implement in Australia in terms of urban stormwater management. So the primary objective of urban stormwater management is to try and replicate the pre-development situation, the pre-development hydrology and water quality using non-structural and structural measures. So when it comes to non-structural measures, it's about allowing specific features in the landscape, such as floodways. In other words, you have areas that are specifically reserved so that if there is heavy rain, if there is flooding, those areas can flood and not affect the people. So there are designated floodways, and we have what's called multiple use corridors. So other areas that are designated for multiple users, I'll come to that later. And also we have a requirement that we can construct buildings, houses, etc. above a certain flood regulation line. Generally, it's around 100-year average recurrence interval. In other words, we cannot build houses which would be subject to flooding at a 100-year return interval flood. And the other approach commonly used is what's referred to as nature-based solutions, or in Australia we call them water-sensitive urban design. This is to manage stormwater pollution. So the term nature-based solutions come from the fact that you don't use energy to manage your stormwater. You essentially depend on nature to do what you want. So these are some of the measures that are commonly implemented. As you can see, they are very simple and nevertheless quite effective. So this is a bar screen that you fix against the culvert, and that retains any rubbish washing down. So instead of having a normal curb and channel, we have what's called a grass field. So stormwater flows across, and the grass will retain some of the pollutants and allowing the stormwater to infiltrate into the ground. So here you have a bioretention basin. So stormwater will come in here, it gets retained, and underneath is a soil filter to remove pollutants. And pardon me, and a constructed wetland which is used for the same purpose, essentially to treat the water and reduce the flood peaks. And we also encourage stormwater reuse. So this is what a multiple use corridor is. So you have got a urban waterway here, there's a public road. So you have this concept of a linear path. So you have this park area, this footpath right along this urban waterway. So that's when it's not raining, it's a park, and when it rains, it becomes a flood detention basin. So this is where the concept of multiple use corridors come in. So you are using the same area for different users. And in terms of stormwater reuse, so rainwater harvesting and reuse is encouraged in urban areas, and is used for a range of uses: residential indoor and outdoor use, irrigating public areas and water features such as ponds and fountains. Is harvested and used for irrigation, industrial uses, and also for groundwater aquifer storage and recovery, or rather managed aquifer recharge. I'll explain that a little bit more. And this is based on the concept of use of water fit for purpose. In other words, the concept is, why do you need to use good quality water for everything that you do? Here, this is a typical profile of water usage in Australia. So we tend to use about 10% in the kitchen, 15% in the bathroom, 15% for washing clothes, hot water, 15%. So you can see this part, that amounts to 55%. So we need good quality water, obviously, in the kitchen, when you take a shower, etc. But For external use, it is 30%. For toilet flushing, 15%, 45%. Why do you need good quality water for that purpose? So the idea is you use water of a given quality for an intended purpose. So this is where the concept of use of water fit for purpose comes in. And this is the aquifer recharge, which I mentioned before. Now, to implement this, you need appropriate hydrogeological conditions, subsurface conditions. So here you collect your storm water, it undergoes treatment, and then you pump this storm water into the groundwater. And then when you want water, you can pump it out. And so this is for a confined aquifer, and this is for an unconfined aquifer. Again, you collect the water in this detention basins, allow it to get into the groundwater, and again, reuse it when you want it. So I come from Queensland. This is not very common in Queensland, but certain other parts of Australia, such as South Australia, where they have got the appropriate hydrogeological, the subsurface conditions. This is very commonly used. I was given 5 minutes to talk about my topic, so I think that's the end of my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ashanta. Now we would like to continue with our schedule and invite Dr. Rui Baracio Assis from the Secretary of Infrastructure and Environment of the State of São Paulo, Professor Alexandre Jahad. He is the Director of Innovation and Transfer of Technology of the Federal Institute of São Paulo, and Professor Luis Felipe Borges Martins. He is a Director of Development of the Federal Institute of São Paulo, to have an interinstitutional articulation for the dissemination of knowledge. Dr. Rui, the floor is yours. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to everyone that is taking part in this launch, the professors, my colleagues, our professors as well as Australia, the people from the Australian Embassy. So I would like to thank all of you for the opportunity of having taken part in this project. And here, by our infrastructure secretary, I would like to salute with enthusiasm this work, which brings a lot of collaboration that is very important for all of us that take part in the process of management of waterways. So the management is extremely complex and full of challenges. And this work, even though it has an academic bias, it is extremely enriching because it brought professionals of different areas, disciplines, and that enrich with knowledge. They bring knowledge systematically acquired and placed in a very organized fashion so we can collaborate with them and with everyone that takes part with this process of management. São Paulo, we have today working 21 committees of basins, water basins, and also we have the participation of over 5,000 people, technicians, professionals, people from the public health, from the public sector, the users, and people of diverse specialties that represent civil society. Now, all throughout Brazil, we have about 250 committees of water basins. So you can imagine that we have here a few dozen, thousands of people working effectively in this process of water management. The work, when we're focusing on management, the planning, and bringing knowledge about several points that are extremely relevant, such as the issue of aquatic life, the indicators, the conflicts, they bring a recognition for this environment of articulation that we have in the public management. The environments are diverse, but one of the most important ones is the Committee of Water Basins and its technical areas. In that sense, when we bring those articles that bring a lot of tools and onlooks and about the issue of management, we are qualifying these participants, we're training these participants. It is an opportunity for everyone that takes part in our system, whether if it's the state of São Paulo or Brazil, all throughout Brazil, to actually use this knowledge, have ownership of this knowledge. And I understand that this appropriation of knowledge brings a training for the participation. We can have the participation with a simple interest or curiosity. But when we participate with a knowledge that is specific, the broader it is, then we have the potential to contribute for the solution of the complex problems that we have in the management of waterways. So we, in the name of the Secretary of the Waterways, of the Water Basins, we would like to congratulate everyone that was involved, that were involved in this project. We know how complex it is, and we congratulate the coordination in this brilliant cooperation with Australia that has a very enriching experience. And as Brazil, you've lived through your water crises, and there was a lot of lessons learned, and we share that with many, many friends. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to have spoken with you. Thank you, Dr. Rui. Now, Professor Alexandre Schad. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure. Well, I know very few people here. Luisa, Cristina, Caleb, and Professor Vasily. It was an honor to having been invited to this project. And we have the Innovation Agency to be able to bridge between the Embassy of Australia and the Caraguatatuba campus. And I realize that this is ever more common in the IFSP, and we are a new institution. And just now we see that we have partnerships with Australia, Germany, Japan, the United States, amongst others. But there is a special flavor in the partnerships with Australia, with Luisa and Matthew. He's no longer in Brazil. So I thank you all in the name of IFSP, this partnership. I thank Professor Vasilik for all of her work in the project and all the participants. And I hope that more and more teachers see what is the real function of the IFSP and all the other federal institutes. We have the biggest capillarity of Brazil. We can make a difference. And this is something that the universities cannot do because they do not have that capillarity. So I believe in the institutes, and I hope that more and more teachers believe that we would be able to change the reality of our country. Thank you, Christina, Luisi, Professor Vasilich, for the brilliancy of the project. Thank you, Professor Shahad. In the name of the Australian Embassy, it's always a pleasure to work with the Federal Institute of São Paulo. You are great partners of ours. I'm going to give the floor to Luis Felipe. Hi, everyone. Good evening, everyone. In the name of Professor Vasilik, and congratulations to everyone involved. And I bring you a few aspects. And this action, as Chad has commented, it was developed with the participation of everyone that was involved. And this brings the reality that is focused on the communities that involve the Federal Institute campus of São Paulo, but it also does an international talk with the participation of the Australian embassy. And it's nice that we can develop this webinar that discuss the issues of sustainability, really. When we see the results of the elections, you work with research and teaching and extension in a way that should, well, bear good fruit and will be an example, great examples for other actions. And I would like to highlight the participation of the students. They are protagonists. They are part of this. And I would like to congratulate, therefore, the students as being the protagonists of these actions. They were part and they developed activities that provide changes in the community. The issue of sustainability also is key. We have to mention it. Very gratifying for us, for our institute. And it's good to identify actions that bring forth the aspects and that guarantee the quality of life of our generation and the future generations. So this discussion goes beyond the campi of all the universities. And I think that I would like to also congratulate and recognize all the effort that Dr. Vasilik has done, Professor Vasilik has done, and you and your team, you have all the responsibility that involve the Australian Embassy, the Research Alliance. You made a significant difference to our outcomes, and you should be very proud. And I hope that you have a lot of pride and joy with what you have done. And it's not easy. You've really made a difference that is inspiring. Congratulations for all the effort and in the name of our university, and thank you for the invitation. I feel very proud to be here in the middle of you. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you, Professor Luis Felipe. Now I have the pleasure of inviting once again Professor Vasilik that will conduct the presentation of the theme of the book. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen very quickly, a little bit more. Can you see this in full screen? Well, this is the first page of our book. It shows how our Brazilian scenario is right now, a part of the northern region of the Amazonas River. But this book has several faces. It has a little bit of everyone that is here on screen. The objective was to share the best practices and disseminate the knowledge for subsidizing the processes of the decision-making process in a sustainable way and very participatory of all the water resources, of all the water basin committees. The book has the participation of 15 institutions, 12 Brazilian, 3 Australian, and 26 authors. The book was divided in 8 chapters. Each of these chapters, they involve tools that are very innovative and that were explained by Yara, and we have case studies, we have literature, and also videos that are complementary, all free access, and they can be used to complement ever more the knowledge of the reader. And the official launch will be on December 18th, with the free availability of at the institutional websites of the supporters and the partners, besides the social media as well. So each of these people had a very important role, and we have a group that varies. Here we see the students that are undergraduate and until researchers, even researchers with decades of experience in each of the chapters. So I would like to, first of all, finish by thanking all the supporters, the Embassy of Australia and TWRA. We would like to highlight Junior that always supported the project, and also Dr. Christina. She's always worked strongly with us to help us work with uh, all the interested parties in this book. Whenever we had a conflict or we had an additional tool that was necessary, she was always taking the forefront so we could solve those issues. She really supported the project. All the authors had a very important participation, but I would like to highlight Janice Pacher. She helped both of us together had the idea of building the project. We developed this project together, so it's her merit as well. And if we didn't have the project, we wouldn't have this book. I would like to thank Yara Giacomini as well. She has always worked in a spectacular way in the support of the publication and marketing, also in the review, in the authorship of the articles. All of the reviewers that we have the support, even from the Federal Institute of the Southern Minas Gerais, Professor Soratini. We got the support of Yara Giacomini from the Secretariat of Water Resources. These are specialists in the area, and they could contribute with very important opinions to value our work. And everybody that provided the pictures and the drawings, Tourism Australia, we had a lot of pictures from them, a lot of collaborating researchers, and the illustrations from the group in the northeastern region that, young illustrators that voluntarily provided the images, and all the people that work in diagrams. They also did a magnificent work to develop our content in a spectacular way. Thank you very much. Thank you to all those involved. Congratulations. Now I give the floor to Professor Luciane Pimentel, and she will tell us about chapter 1 for you. Okay. And now we continue with the presentation.
Hello, everyone. Good evening to everyone in Brazil and Australia. Thank you, Professor Vasiliki, for the introduction, for presenting a bit of this project. I have to say I'm very happy to be part of this. And I'm here representing some of the colleagues who are the co-authors of Chapter 1, opening this very important publication for Brazil and Australia. But it is going to be a very important thing to represent this beautiful partnership that we have for Brazil and Australia. So I'm here representing Carmen Correa Cardozo and also Professor Vasiliki Bolomitis. Well, this chapter has to do with a very important aspect, which is society, water, and society. We know that water is a common asset, common good, I would say, for everyone. So we have to put the perspective of our society into these projects when we're talking about management of the water. So this chapter was divided into 7 sections and also the case study. As you can see here, we're talking about water resources in Brazil, also the importance of the committees on water basins. We have this overview on water resources in Brazil, the management of such resources in Brazil, social participation in water management. Another important element that is, of course, discussed here is environmental education when it comes to water management and social innovation. And last but not least, as I was saying, we have a case study, and this presents a method for assessment of programs and projects for water resources. Let me briefly show you a bit more. Recently, we had a change in the management system for water resources, but most of the structure was maintained. We had the committees here that I wanted to highlight because they're the forum really where the space really where society is going to participate. Brazil has a very privileged situation in terms of water resources. We have 12% of water resources around the world in Brazil, but we have this great challenge, this great responsibility. When it comes to global changes and climate change, we still have to have a sustainable, responsible management of these resources. There is a contrast, though. It doesn't always happen the way it should. Unfortunately, as was shown briefly before, there have been issues with waste management or basic sanitation issues. We now have a new reference for sanitation actually in Brazil, but there are many challenges because we have to solve issues that already exist in this scenario that is still a little bit unknown, so to speak. Therefore, committees are going to play an essential role in this. This is where civil society is going to also be part of this discussion. So we have governments participating, and this is where we have the chance to also have a more responsible outlook on water management. Now, in terms of environmental education, I would say this is very important because since we have many different technologies nowadays, a lot of innovations, such as Zoom, for instance, where we're performing all this, where we're organizing all this meeting, but also we have social innovation, not just technology. So technology will help us change the way we do things, but we also have to think about social innovation in order to adapt to changes and mitigate any risks in the future. So it is very important to us to review what we're doing. And I don't think there's another way other than environmental education so that we can truly go beyond and think about this for the future. Actually, in this scenario, we have to think about the SDGs, the Sustainability Development Goals. And I think, well, number 6 would be the highlight here. But in Brazil and in Australia, since we have such a great urban population, we also have to think about number 11 and 13. So climate change and resilient cities or communities. So we have seen a change in rain levels. We've seen somewhat of a water crisis in many places. So we have to be more resilient, and we need social innovation to be able to do that and reduce the suffering of the people involved. Well, I also wanted to mention that when it comes to environmental education, there are many players. So both in school and in the informal type of education. In Brazil and in many other places, we've had many development gaps. So the informal education would also be important here to try and include people who didn't have the chance to go to school or to have this contact with very important topics for sustainability. So we have developed a system. This is actually our case study. It is a system to assess different projects. So here we're considering many different elements in terms of environmental education. This system presents some tables, some figures, and then we reach a final classification or ranking. But it's not just about that grade or final assessment. It is actually more about thinking about the application of this process. There are many things here, such as critical education, participation in the process, people being mobilized really to promote social justice. So that's the most important thing for the system. Well, to wrap up, I wanted to once again thank and congratulate everyone organizing the publication of this book, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here. So I'm very happy to finally mention Gandhi saying that every day nature will produce what is enough for our needs. If everyone only took what is necessary, there wouldn't be any poverty in the world and nobody would die of hunger. So there's this analogy here between water, between food, between resources. We can take this beyond. We can take this to water management as well. If we were able to use water in a more conscious manner, then we wouldn't have the current scenario. Certainly it would be easier for all these cities that are already suffering with this water crisis in so many places in Brazil. Well, this is my email address. Please let me know if you have any questions, any comments. I will be happy to receive your email. I am Luciene Pimentel, professor of the postgrad course at University PUC in Paraná, south of Brazil, and also collaborator of the University of the State of Rio de Janeiro. So I will be very happy to hear from you. And now let me turn it over to my colleague, my friend, Professor Antonio Carlos Zufo, to talk about Chapter 2. Hello. Good evening, Luciana. Good evening, everyone. That was a great presentation, and I would like to thank you and everyone who spoke before me. So this really was a great introduction for me to tell you more about chapter number 2. Let me know if you can see my screen. Okay, so chapter 2. I want to give you any spoilers, but I think it is necessary to just let you know a bit more about this without showing you all of the details. This chapter is about plans for the management of water resources. We have Rafael Talita Panegasi, Urania Cardozo, and Professor Vasiliki participating in this chapter. Since I'm not going to tell you everything about these plans right now, because there are different perspectives, different themes, and since we're talking about a multidisciplinary theme, I just wanted to say the following. This book has different perspectives, different backgrounds, which allow TWRA to partner with researchers and think about a more broad outlook on this, even though it is an introductory book to water resources, but it's mostly to let people know more about water management, and then if they like the idea, whether they're from this specific area or other sectors, then they may read more and find out more. We begin by showing a little bit of the history of water management in Brazil, some of the experiences that were acquired in the past. So we're basically talking about some centuries and what happened since we had different cultures, we had different aspects to it. So that, of course, leads to different approaches as well and decisions. So this is more of the context, the history in Brazil regarding water management. So ever since Brazil was a colony of Portugal until recently. And actually, until recently, we had still many aspects that continued to be the same. But we showed how things changed. I didn't want to give you a spoiler of the book, so I'm really showing you a brief idea of the different sections of the book, of the chapter, actually, chapter number 2. We're talking about the instruments for management, and we're also talking about management and planning for water resources. And many people don't really know what the difference is, or they think that there are synonyms, but it's really different. I mean, when it comes to planning, you're trying to have a forecast. We're trying to have to understand what the model is for the future, and management is mostly about applying what has been planned and then checking to see if things are going well. It is like a symphony, I would say. You will have the instruments, you will have the symphony, you will try to have some harmony, right? The songwriter or the composer is going to think about all that. But then when you have the maestro, I mean when the symphony is being played by the conductor, by the maestro, then they're going to think about other aspects. And it's pretty much the same, because you need both the planning of a basin and also the management. And you're going to have to adapt to the climate, to the temperature, to the soil, to all of the elements present in every place. It is completely different to have a plan and management plan for each and every place. Now, just a brief design of the strategies for planning of water resources. We have socioeconomic needs. We also have the administrative guidelines, or we're talking about the main needs, the plans, the interventions, the different sectors, the policies for environmental protection. We are also discussing goals for use, some indicators, some different types of assessments. So we're going to have many criteria involved. And then when it comes to making decisions, then we have the committee, we have some other entities, and we also have the organism that is in charge, the entity that is in charge of the water resources. And finally, we reach that final plan for water resources. You know, if you want to know more about this, you may read the book and be inspired to research more on this topic. Thank you very much. Let me turn it over to Professor Vasiliki. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Zufo. I will now invite Professor Zaki Schaber from Queen Mary University of London. She will be telling us a little bit more on chapter 3.
Good evening, everyone from Delft in the Netherlands. I'm very happy to be with you this evening to present chapter 3. Before I do that, I'd like to congratulate the team that's been working on this important project and to congratulate you on the pre-launch of the book. On a personal level, I'm delighted to be connected to Brazil through Yara Giacomini, as well as to Australia through my maternal grandfather, who was Australian. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Yara for inviting me to co-author this chapter and to present it to you today. So let me hopefully, let's see, pull up my slides. I apologize, I have a new computer. And it is not helping me. Let me see. No, it doesn't seem to want to cooperate. So perhaps, yes, I know it's the green button, but unfortunately, the setup of my computer doesn't seem to allow me to put the slides up. So that's unfortunate. I don't know if I can ask Yara perhaps to share her screen instead. Yara, would you be able to do that for me? And I apologize for the delay. Oops. Okay. So let's see. So while the slides are coming up, just to let you know, the chapter that I'm presenting is chapter 3, and it's about an important topic, which is the management of conflicts around the use of water. And of course, as with the other chapters, it includes a case study of a water conflict in Australia in the Murray-Darling Basin. So there we are. This is the chapter, and what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is to just give you a flavor of the content of the chapter. And I think what's interesting about it is that it combines both theoretical aspects of conflict resolution, but also practical ones. And of course, it references the situation in Brazil. So first, I'll say a few things about the increasing number of conflicts that we're seeing worldwide that are related to water and some of their causes, to set the overall scene and to compare the general situation with what's happening in Brazil. Then I'll give you a very brief description of conceptualization of the process of managing a water conflict. And then finally, I'll give you an insight into some of the tools that you can find in the chapter regarding the process of managing water conflicts. So Yara, if I may ask you for the next slide, please. I'm starting with a round of headlines from around the world, many of which date from a few weeks or a few months. And what we're seeing at the moment is a significant increase in the report of water conflicts. Now, I have a quote as well by Mark Twain, who told us that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over. So reminding us of the importance of water for life on our planet. And in fact, water conflicts are as old as civilization, and we know that thousands of years ago, cities along the Tigris and the Euphrates in ancient Mesopotamia had water-related conflicts. And these are ongoing today, and I haven't included it here, but Professor Aaron Wolf, who's mentioned in the chapter, often says that water management is in fact conflict management. So there are water conflicts all around the world and at different levels. What's causing these conflicts in the different countries of these headlines, as well as in Brazil? We have competition between users, often intensified due to dwindling resources, climate change being one of the main causes. We have an increasing number of users, which is putting pressure on existing resources. We have disrupted rainfall patterns affecting access to drinking water and affecting agricultural production, as well as livelihoods that require water. We have significant pollution issues that can prevent the use of water. We have the construction of infrastructure such as dams with the potential to decrease flows downstream. And so we see this happening in Brazil, in Australia, but also in Africa, in Europe, in North America, in Central Asia. And we see that farmers, herders, indigenous people, and states are all concerned by these. And the picture on the top right is a picture of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is causing significant tension between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. So what this chapter tries to do is to provide a conceptual framework to look at how conflicts can be managed, which is divided into 3 parts. I should say here also that the conflict resolution mechanisms that are referred alternative dispute resolution. We're not talking here about going to court. We're talking about negotiations or processes that involve a third party. And so starting with step 1, that's really understanding the conflict. So analyzing the conflict, what are the different elements, what's the history, who are the actors, what is the water concerned, and so forth, in order to really understand what's going on, to be able to determine the strategy that will then be adopted, that we will adopt as parties in the dispute, vis-a-vis the other parties in that dispute, in order to prepare for the next step, which is really the step during which there is engagement between the different parties. And here on the slide, there's reference to negotiations, but obviously, as I said earlier, a third party could also be involved, so there could be mediation. And that's obviously a very important process, because it's the one that will lead at the end, hopefully, to a decision between the parties as to how they are going to resolve the dispute. And then the third element, which is very important but often overlooked, is really the practical aspects of implementing the decision that's been agreed by the parties. Very often, while you're in the heat of the negotiations, you're not necessarily thinking about the practicalities, the financing, the institutional aspects, who's going to be doing what, allocating responsibilities clearly, and so forth. So it's important to also bear that aspect in mind while the negotiations are proceeding, and then to have the ability to actually implement and monitor what's happening. Now, as I said, this is really very much a conceptualized framework, because in reality, events do not happen in sequence as presented here, but go back and forth along that continuum. But it does help to understand where you're at in the process when you're dealing with a conflict, and what you need to do. Perhaps you need to do a bit more analysis, or perhaps look into implementation aspects. And so this is the general framework that can be used. And the chapter describes in more detail some of the tools that you can use for that. And I've included a few here on the slides. Some of them relate to conflict analysis, and you may have come across the tree, for instance, that allows you to look at what is the root of the conflict, how it's expressed, particularly through water, what the water element has to do with it, but also looking at the parties themselves. What position are they adopting vis-a-vis the water resource in question? What's their interests? What are their needs? And then also looking at how the stakeholders might relate to each other through the mapping of the stakeholder. And then a really important element of the engagement, the process itself is active listening, and that's also described in the chapter, and important elements such as, for instance, the setting of the negotiation. What is going to be the best way to sit down with the other party? Should we be sitting opposite each other? What kind of atmosphere should be in the room? Thinking about important aspects such as providing food and drinks to the parties, so that the environment really enables constructive discussions between the parties. So this is really some of the key elements that you'll find in the chapter, and applied as well to the situation in Brazil and to the case study in Australia. And I will stop here, and I hope I will have enticed you to read this chapter of this important book, and to try and understand better how water conflicts can be managed. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Yara to present chapter 4.
Good evening, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for the invitation from Professor Vasiliki for being part of this project, and for taking a little bit of the knowledge of the management of water resources for other people in different countries. My biggest pride and joy is to be able to share with you a little bit of that experience with other states that yet do not have their water basin committees duly instituted, or that have them but still need some sort of improvement. So all the experience is valid when we want to improve. And the water resources management, it is always being improved. It's never ready. Therefore, we have the experience, we're planning, we are trying to get the adjustments. There are problems and things that we did not predict, and we need to adjust again. So I think that this is my greatest pleasure, to be part of this process and to be able to collaborate with the growth of the water basin committees in Brazil, and also to learn with the experience of Australia. They have a different approach, and that's why the experience can be added. So now I'm going to share my screen to present chapter 4, which is water safety. Let's talk a little bit about water safety, and you will find it in this chapter. Besides the concept of water safety, this is a case study of the prioritization of investment in green infrastructure for the capture of water here. So if we talk about the water safety, we have to see how much water we have in the world, and I think that this figure is very good at showing this, because this biggest droplet here that we see in the image, it represents the entirety of the water in the earth. It might be subterraneous, it might be frozen, it might be salt. So the small little bubble, it's the one that is a percentage of liquid water that we have, so excluding the permafrost and, you know, the big ice structures. So we only have 0.78% of liquid water. And if we do a deep dive, the water that is available out of that water, what is available in rivers and lakes, that's 0.17%. When we look at these numbers, I don't even know if you can see this little tiny dot here that represents that 0.17% of the water in the world. We can have clearly, we can see the reason why we have to talk about water safety. Water safety is a concept that is recent. in the management of water resources, mainly in Brazil. The concept the definition was developed by the UN and adopted by ANA. It focuses on human well-being and the socioeconomical development. And chapter 4 talks about that. Still talks about what are the motivation to discuss and bring this issue to the managers, the politicians. The main one are the urbanization, the population growth, industrialization, and pollution. And more recently, the cherry on the cake, which is the climate change, and also the water crisis in Brazil of 2014 and 15. That demanded from the politicians, the public figures, the managers, they had to review the water surety or safety with more proximity and more care, mainly due to the impacts that the lack of water security brings to the society. It has been very much discussed there has been heated debates on the impacts of what the water shortage brings on tourism, the biodiversity, culture, and even spirituality of society at the different levels. Here, we can see that we have a potential of conflicts that is very large. If we take the presentation here, we're talking about different interests, a different use of water. So in a water crisis, with a situation of water uncertainty, who is going to use how much water and where are they going to use it? These are the recommended approaches to talk about water security or safety. We have the pillars. The integrated management of water resources. Do not dissociate any aspect of water. No administrative cutouts. Another pillar is the participation and decentralization, both principles present in the national policy of water resources, and this new pillar, which is hydrodiplomacy, presented by Zach. Because if we do not learn how to talk with all the other interested parties that will talk about their needs, we cannot evolve. So, based on these talks in this management, this diagnostics of water safety, this leads to a plan. Here in Brazil, we can see that the Water National Agency brings us a manual on how to do a water safety plan and also, a specific plan for Brazil to discuss these aspects that are talked about in the book with a lot more depth. But we need to be very careful. For the water safety, just a plan will not talk about the water safety in an integral way. We have to talk about the safety of water, and we have the plan deals with the quantity, but also the quality of this area, of this water. We need to have water with a minimal amount of quality in order to use it to service the requirements of the population. And that cannot be uncoupled from the water basins plan. So we need a framework of planning, which is grounded by the integrated plans of water resources. How can we make them talk? And how can they go to the basis of the management, which are the water basins? So here we can know how we can do the water safety. But even though this is already very complex, we can make it even more complex. If after this introduction, we realize that we need to do a water safety plan and still approach other plans that are in the territory, the concept of water safety is very new. So we have paradigms in the debates the debates of academia and the specialists on the theme, which is the concept of water safety adopted by the UN and ANA. They focus on subsistence of human populations, very specific ones that have access to the economic powers. And not all the population has that access. So it would be just the subsistence of a few populations of full nations. That's what the plans have to take into consideration. And what motivates water safety? Will it be the needs of the state or the needs of the individuals that form these states? So these paradigms that appear in the debates and the implementation of these plans that also bring forth challenges and experiences end up reflecting in other issues. So what the chapter talks about, such as the water citizenship, a way of belonging to the city where they have water, why some people have it, the nature as a user of water, or even the ecosystemic services. These paradigms and these reflections that come from the experience, they should be used as guides for the improvement of the plans and the implementation of the concept of the water safety. This is a non-cessant loop, as I told you in the beginning. Management is always improving. And that's how, with this idea, that the chapter of water safety is brought to you, and I hope that you enjoy it. Now, I'll give the floor to Professor Andres Sotero. You may speak. Hello, Yara. Congratulations for your presentation. I'm going to comment. Chapter 5. I will share my screen. I am a professor at the University of Engineering of Unicamp at Campinas. I would like to thank Professor Vasilik. The screen is not working. I don't know if you can see it. I believe so. So I would like to thank Professor Vasilik for the great invitation. I would also like to thank Professor Zufo and Francisco Gomez from TWRA, and I'm going to make a comment about Chapter 5, which is management of urban areas, the waters of urban areas. So we have the contamination and the occupancy of the land that is not very well planned, the supply of water for the urban areas, the properties of water, and here thinking about reuse, the integration of the public policies for the water management and urban management, and the chapter finishes with a case study that is very interesting about the management of water ways in Australia. It's very simple in language, and the water crisis that we live is very important. We have several authors working here, so it does an approach, and it's a simple language that allows the managers that have an idea to have an idea about the expansion of the urban area waterways. The sub-item 5.1 talks about the occupation, not planned, and the contamination of water, the effect of urban occupation without control, without planning, and the commitment of those waters, and the compromise of those waters, actually. We can see some very didactic, real images that you've seen on your professional areas. Talks about the water scarcity and rationing of water, entire cities without the water supply, and many times cities that were not ready for the supply that is in a system that was projected to not have any stoppages. They are projected for 24-hour working, and when they stop, the supply, the populations end up not having water for a long time when they have rotation. And there is not only problems, but we have to see the lack of water makes us think, how can we model? How can we plan? How can we plan the systems? And we can present a few diagrams that we can think in the way of improving the management of the system. Also, we can talk about the experience. It's very important. The principles of PlanSab. It talks about the technological matrix to plan the sector policies, thinking about long-term new technologies, innovation, and still we have the main topics here to guide the best use and the best application of the financial resources, thinking about a water balance and the recovery of water in the system without necessarily having to have more financial investments. So many times these small cities, they don't have technical teams that are complete. So the idea is that the chapter not only presents problems, but it presents a few paths to solve this. And we close the chapter with a very interesting case study that uses the urban water resources in Australia. So I would like to leave you with my contact information, my email. And should you have any problems, any questions, let me know. Thank you, Professor Vasilik, for the opportunity. And to Professor Zufo and Francisco for the opportunity. And now I will call to the floor my colleague. Thereafter, so to share Professor Luisa Ishikawa from the University PUC Campinas. Please, Professor Luisa, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here presenting about this. I am from the PUC Campinas University, and I represent Jaguati Bahia, an NGO. So we work with rivers Piracicaba, Jundiaí, and some other rivers in the state of Sao Paulo. I'm going to share my slides here. On chapter 6, we're going to be talking about the invasive species in water ecosystems, and we have Andrea Isaac, Gabriela Sponchiado, Janice Peixer, Carolina Serpa, Larissa Corteletti da Costa, Luiz Ishikawa Ferreira, which is me. And let me tell you a little bit more about this. We're talking about the introduction of species, which could be a bioinvasion. I mean, these are species that were not common in these places, but they were brought. And here in the picture, you can see on this slide 2 examples of invasors. One of them actually leads to a lot of issues in the basins in Brazil. We're talking about bivalve species here, and they were introduced in the Brazilian environment, and this is not something that happened naturally. We also do a monitoring of the different species, and then, again, it's very important to understand which species are not natural because they're going to be competing with the native species, and then they may cause a reduction of such species, or they may even cause extinction of some of them. We also discussed the preservation of nature due to its value not just the economic value, but value overall. So we have to maintain these natural resources. Well, I will turn it over to Gabriela Sponchiado-Hein now to present chapter number 7. Hello. I'm just going to wait for Professor Luisa Ishikawa to stop sharing. Well, I will begin then. Good evening or good morning if you're in Australia. I am Gabriela Hein. I am a biologist and I also study my postgrad degree at UN. Let me share my slides now so that I can tell you more about chapter 7. So chapter 7 is about bioindicators, and it was written by Andrea Isaac, myself, Jenny Spacer, Carolina Serpa, Larissa da Costa, and Yara Moreto. At the end of the chapter, we also have a case study about understanding the quality of water for storage in low or variable levels by David Hamilton. Well, we know that these environments have many different types of pressure. So it is important to understand the conditions of these environments. I mean, it is useless to have plenty of water if we don't have the right conditions. That is why it's important to monitor it. And that's why we started the chapter talking about that. It is the process through which we gather more information on the conditions of water environments in rivers or other flows of water. And we analyze all the structures of the biologic communities that are present in those places. So we're going to try and see the richness, the diversity of that community. And then we can notice if there was a change in that place, in that site. And we may also see if that happened naturally or due to other factors. And the organisms that we use would be the bioindicators. That's the way we call them. So these are some of them actually that I put here on the slide. We have the invertebrates, we have the macrophytes, we have algae, we have fish, and some others. So all of them are in our chapter. We talk about some characteristics, etc. We have some illustrations that were done especially for our chapter, and they represent the group of fish, and here the macroinvertebrates. We also discuss some of the bioindicator tools that we have. One of them would be the types of indexes that we have. First of all, we have the Biologic Integrity Index, and we also the BMWP, the Biological Monitoring Working Party. So when we're going to use that kind of index, we have to see that the metrics may vary according to the bioindicator. That is why we have many different examples on the chapter of metrics that we can use with fish, with macroinvertebrates, macrophytes, and periphyton. So this helps us continue this process. And to wrap up, I would say that we have a case study, a very important, interesting case study from Australia, the one that I mentioned before by David Hamilton. He basically made a list of the climate changes that happen, the variations in water levels, the chemical alterations, the differences in quality of life, water as well. So that may have an effect on biodiversity and also an effect on water supplies for humans. So we have to have a more rigorous monitoring of the waters. So I just brought you this image here because I find it interesting. It shows the types of changes that we may be dealing with. And it's very well explained. It's easy to understand. And well, again, because of climate change and water level variations, we may have all these consequences. Now, let me stop sharing and turn it over to the next speaker, Professor Evanilde Benedito from UEM, University of Maringá. Hello, Gabriela. Hello, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be part of this group of professionals. I would like to truly thank Professor Vasiliki for being a leader really in this project. Such an amazing project with a very accessible language, I would say, to everyone interested, students, researchers, everyone. Well, it is an honor now to present Chapter 8, which talks about different players involved and social communication. This was redacted by Christina, myself, Jacqueline, Professor Maximilian Squariti, and Vasiliki. And the goal of this chapter was talking about the policies or some other factors involved whenever we have many players discussing for public policies. And the example is what we can observe in the Committee for Water Basins in Rio Capibari, Jundiaí, and Piracicaba, the different rivers that we have. So we have some internal and external players here involved in the discussion of public policies. And this chapter also brings a lot of information on 2 case studies. The first one being about sharing knowledge, sharing experiences with the community, university, and actually these 2 players, these 2 external players can join efforts with the internal players, I mean the government sectors as well. Here in this picture, we can see a little bit more about that. And actually, before it became a vivarium, there was a deposit of garbage. So we are very happy to know that now this environment has plants. We're going to even expand this plant nursery because it brings more resources to the population in that region, the population working in that environment. The chapter also brings another case study from Australia, from the northwestern region, where a population depending on the production of pearls and also tourism had their environment attacked by a plague, I would say, and then the farmers, alongside with the industry, they joined efforts and they came up with a method to avoid the invasion of such plagues. That was validated by the university, and then it was a very successful project. So again, this chapter shows how different players, internal and external players, can join their efforts to have more sustainability and fruitful results. And finally, the chapter will mention the importance of maintaining that joint effort, because once you have more awareness on the use of resources, this is easier to maintain, both for water management, for any kind of water flow, especially the ones that are essential, like springs, for instance, that are essential for cities, and also for reverse logistics. in many different places in the coastline of Australia, where we have lots of waste being transformed in that place to use them as resources as well. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I will turn it over to the next speaker now. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Evanilde. Thank you all so much for presenting the chapters of the book. Now, before the next and last session of this event, I will turn it over to Professor David Hamilton, Vice Director, Professor of the Australian Rivers Institute at Griffith University. He will be talking about the collaboration of Australia and other players. Professor Hamilton, hello.
To floods, obviously, and they also relate to droughts. And if you were to come to Brisbane, then Lake Wivenhoe, our major water supply reservoir, underwent a very long, prolonged period of drought in what was known as the Millennium Drought until about 2009 or 10. And then we had some major floods in 2011 and 2013. And so these are obviously have implications on many things. One of them being the effect of the water levels in terms of reducing the amount of water that goes into reservoirs. The low water levels also may result in anoxia of bottom waters or in very shallow waters of resuspension of bottom sediments. And obviously, one of the big issues is around cyanobacteria blooms and the way that those low water levels affect the cyanobacteria. And so one of the things that we've been doing is to work on building catchment resilience, providing tools for targeted catchment investments so that we can go into, look over a whole catchment, identify sub-catchments, and work out where to implement actions to build resilience to these extreme events. And the extreme events, of course, being the droughts and being the floods. So how can we undertake management actions that will change some of these things? So thank you once again for the opportunity to be involved with this. It fits very nicely with some of our efforts to be able to work with Brazil and hopefully work on our common water problems, our common water goals, and to be able to obtain some of the investment for water security into the future. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, Professor Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Professor Hamilton. And for our last session, I would like to turn it over to Yara Giacomini once more, Director of the Department of Planning and Management of Water Resources at the Secretariat of Infrastructure and Environment in Sao Paulo. And she will be talking about the book and its relevance for water basins and some other committees.
Hello, everyone. I will be very quick because we've gone over the time. I'm going to share my screen with a very quick presentation, and I'm going to tell you how can we use this book that is here presented. So, the book brings, well, besides everything that was presented by the authors, we have several QR codes. all throughout the chapters, bringing different approaches and different possibilities of doing a deep dive in the reading and the knowledge of the theme. So we have experience from several states that can contribute with the theme of every chapter. There is the suggestion for movies, recordings that are in the internet that can be freely watched, added to the reading of the chapter of the book. We have videos that help to understand what was described, the suggestion of books. How do we say books that are read? You can hear them as you, like a podcast. At the end of each chapter, you have the QR code for the webinars that talk about the issue of each chapter, the theme of each chapter. So this is an opportunity to do a deep dive. We have news, we have ebooks, and we have the different books as examples. These are possibilities to do more research. For who are we targeting this book? For new members of the water basin committees, they bring the ABC of the water management. For experienced members of water basin committees, some need to be updated, and curious because this is very didactic material. So I'm going to finish by saying that the book has a panoramic overview of the management of water resources, and through the QR codes, they invite to do a deep dive in each of the themes. And now I give the floor to the organizers. Thank you, Yara. Now we are getting to the end of our event. And this evening in Brazil, the morning in Australia, I would like to thank both speakers from Australia and Brazil and everybody that is watching us. Last but not least, I would like to invite Christina Elsner. She is the Manager of Education for the Embassy of Australia. She is an author of a chapter, and she collaborated actively for these projects. Now you can give us your ideas. Well, a good morning here in Australia. The time, we've gone over the time, but I would like to use this final minute to thank all of you for your collaboration. This book has shown that science can unite, even though we have all the barriers, all the distance, all the policies. And in this case with Australia, we have the difference in the time is very different. And during a year that it was a very complicated year due to the pandemic, and still we can keep connected. So we demonstrated that by working in a network inside of Brazil between several institutions and researchers of different themes, we could make the virtual environment into a dynamic environment, an environment of connections, and an environment of collective building of ideas. And this is what we need the most when we are dealing with global challenges and the management of water resources and the issue of climate change, which is also very important during the previous presentations. And as Professor Davidovic always says, science makes us hope and break all the barriers, even financial and political, and can get us closer to building solutions. So I believe that in the power of this public, this is not the end of a work, but this is the beginning of a national network, global network, national supported by TWRA, and the team behind us, and international, because we have members from more than 3 countries, and this is a great honor and satisfaction to be a part of all this. So I wanted to use this moment just to reinforce, as it was mentioned before, the availability of the Embassy of Australia supporting the activities of research and public actions. This was a project that was supported by an NGO of Australia. And we have an open bid for projects for 2022 next year, so they can be executed in collaboration with students as facility and any member of study. And the MOU that was renewed by the National Agency of Water, the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding that TWRA of Brazil and the Embassy of Australia we signed, we support with the strength of science working together in Brazil and Australia, and mainly to try and find the ways of getting an agreement that was recently rectified in the Brazilian Congress for innovation and technology between Brazil and Australia. So we have a lot of legal ways of looking at our work and thinking about more actions. And we have David here, Professor Ashanta. So in the name of Australia, I also invite the researchers, Brazilian researchers, to get closer to the Australian institutions. And just to close, I'm going to share my screen since I couldn't share before. But I hope that, well, this is the team that took part in this project. So thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you that took part and everybody that supported and made possible this work. And we hope that this is just the first step towards future works. With this exchange between science and technology, this network between Brazil and Australia. So I'm going to close so we don't go over the time, and bid you a good evening and good morning. Thank you, Christina. Well, now it's the time to close this event for the pre-launch of the sustainable management of the water basins. This is an important step in the strengthening of the Brazilian research and Australian research institutes related to water, as Christina has commented, as the promotion of the engagement model for university with the local community, and as a reference for community leaders and the researchers of water basins here in Brazil. I would like to thank immensely, once again, to all of you for taking part in this event. Thank you.